When I first moved into Maple Creek Estates, it felt like a dream come true. The houses were neatly lined with white fences, kids played on cul-de-sacs until sunset, and everyone smiled and waved when you passed by. It was the kind of peaceful community people imagined when they pictured the good life. The Homeowners Association, the HOA, was supposed to keep things organized, mow the shared lawns, maintain the entrance signs, and make sure the place stayed beautiful. At first, they seemed harmless enough. Monthly newsletters, polite reminders about trash cans and lawn heights. It all felt routine. But as months passed, small rules started turning into big restrictions. Suddenly, you needed approval to paint your mailbox, permission to plant a tree, and fines came for leaving your truck in the driveway overnight. The board members acted like local royalty, especially the new members who treated every rule like it was law. They started patrolling the neighborhood, snapping photos of violations, and gossiping about residents who dared to speak up. The sense of community began to fade. Instead of neighbors helping neighbors, it became everyone watching everyone. I tried to ignore it at first, focusing on my quiet corner of the neighborhood, my home at the very end of Maple Creek Road. My house sat right beside a narrow lane that wound through a stretch of woods and led to the main road. That lane was my private access, built long before the HOA even existed. But I didn't know it would soon become the center of a storm that would change everything. The HOA's control was spreading, and before long they'd set their eyes on my road. The road leading to my house was not much to look at, just a narrow stretch of asphalt, about 200 feet long, bordered by tall oak trees and wild grass. It was quiet, shaded, and always smelled faintly of pine after a good rain. That road wasn't just a path, it was part of my home. I had helped resurface it myself when I bought the property, patching cracks and clearing branches after every storm. The truth was, that little lane existed long before the HOA did. It was a remnant of the original property line, an old easement that connected my land to the county road. When Maple Creek Estates was built around it years later, the developers left my access untouched because it was legally mine. The HOA had no claim over it. It wasn't listed in their plats, maps, or documents. But to the HOA board, details like that didn't seem to matter. Still, I stayed polite. When the HOA first formed, I paid the small annual dues, attended a few meetings, and waved at the board president, a woman named Linda Harper, whenever she passed by. Linda was the kind who always smiled too wide, the kind of person who would bake you cookies while reminding you that your grass was an inch too tall. She was harmless then, or so I thought. I noticed her attention shift toward my road one spring afternoon. She stopped by while I was trimming branches near the entrance and asked, "Have you thought about paving this properly? It looks off-brand for the neighborhood." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "It's private," I told her, "not part of the HOA's property." She smiled tightly. "Oh, everything inside Maple Creek belongs to the community one way or another." That line stuck with me. It wasn't just a statement, it was a warning disguised as casual talk. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing HOA trucks driving slower near my road. Workers parked cones at the edge, by mistake. And then, one morning, I found a bright orange sign planted at the start of my lane that read, "HOA Maintenance Area. Access Restricted." I stood there staring at it, my coffee growing cold in my hand. It wasn't just my road anymore, it seemed. The HOA had decided to claim it. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't going to end with a polite conversation. It was going to be a battle. The road leading to my house was not much to look at, just a narrow stretch of asphalt, about 200 feet long, bordered by tall oak trees and wild grass. It was quiet, shaded, and always smelled faintly of pine after a good rain. That road wasn't just a path, it was part of my home. I had helped resurface it myself when I bought the property, patching cracks and clearing branches after every storm. The truth was, that little lane existed long before the HOA did. It was a remnant of the original property line, an old easement that connected my land to the county road. When Maple Creek Estates was built around it years later, the developers left my access untouched because it was legally mine. The HOA had no claim over it. It wasn't listed in their plats, maps, or documents. But to the HOA board, details like that didn't seem to matter. Still, I stayed polite. When the HOA first formed, I paid the small annual dues, attended a few meetings, and waved at the board president, a woman named Linda Harper, whenever she passed by. Linda was the kind who always smiled too wide, the kind of person who would bake you cookies while reminding you that your grass was an inch too tall. She was harmless then, or so I thought. I noticed her attention shift toward my road one spring afternoon. She stopped by while I was trimming branches near the entrance and asked, "Have you thought about paving this properly? It looks off-brand for the neighborhood." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "It's private," I told her, "not part of the HOA's property." She smiled tightly. "Oh, everything inside Maple Creek belongs to the community one way or another." That line stuck with me. It wasn't just a statement, it was a warning disguised as casual talk. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing HOA trucks driving slower near my road. Workers parked cones at the edge, by mistake. And then, one morning, I found a bright orange sign planted at the start of my lane that read, "HOA Maintenance Area. Access Restricted." I stood there staring at it, my coffee growing cold in my hand. It wasn't just my road anymore, it seemed. The HOA had decided to claim it. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't going to end with a polite conversation. It was going to be a battle. It started early one morning, just before sunrise. The rumble of heavy machinery echoed down the street, waking me before my alarm ever could. When I looked out my window, I saw two orange construction trucks parked near the entrance to my lane. Workers in reflective vests were unloading cones, barriers, and rolls of caution tape. At first, I thought they had the wrong address. There were no scheduled repairs, no notices, no warning of any kind. But as I walked closer, I saw the bright white stencil painted across the pavement. HOA Project, Roadwork in Progress. My stomach sank. They were actually doing it. I waved down one of the workers and asked, "Who sent you here?" "Maple Creek Estates HOA," he said without hesitation. "We were told this is community property." "Community property?" I repeated, trying not to laugh. "This road is on my deed. It's private access." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, the order came from your HOA president, Mrs. Harper. You'll have to take it up with her." By the time I returned to the end of the lane, a bright yellow barricade stood across it, blocking entry to my driveway. My car was trapped on the wrong side, and there was no way around. I stormed down to the HOA office, a small, overly decorated building near the clubhouse, and found Linda sitting behind the front desk, sipping her coffee like she had been expecting me. "Good morning," she said sweetly, not even looking up from her papers. "You've got trucks blocking my property," I snapped. "Move them, now." She gave a slow, deliberate sigh and finally looked up. "We're improving the neighborhood's roads, dear. It's temporary." "That road doesn't belong to you," I said, slamming a copy of my deed onto her desk. "It's right here in black and white." She barely glanced at it. "We'll let our legal committee review it. In the meantime, construction will continue." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Linda knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to make an example out of me. Over the next 2 days, I was effectively trapped. The workers tore up the edge of the pavement, left piles of gravel blocking the entrance, and taped off the entire area. Neighbors walked by whispering. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Others gave sympathetic looks but said nothing. On the third day, a new sign appeared. "No entry, HOA enforcement in effect." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a road. It was about control. And the HOA had just declared war. By the end of that week, I'd had enough. The barricade at the start of my road wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was a message. The HOA wanted to remind me that they could do whatever they pleased, even if it meant cutting off my only access to my home. That Friday morning, I drove up to the barrier, a line of orange cones and metal fencing blocking the lane like a private fortress. I stepped out of my car, heart pounding, and started dragging the cones aside one by one. Gravel crunched under my boots, and my frustration fueled every movement. That's when I heard it. "Excuse me." Linda Harper's voice carried across the street like a siren. She marched toward me, clipboard in hand, wearing her usual pastel cardigan, and that tight-lipped smile that could curdle milk. Behind her trailed two HOA board members, Tom, the treasurer who never spoke above a whisper, and Janet, the self-proclaimed community safety officer. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Linda demanded. I pointed at the barricade. "Getting into my property. You've blocked my driveway for a week. That's community infrastructure, not your property," she said, in that fake patient tone she reserved for people she planned to bully. "The HOA has full authority to restrict access during maintenance." "Maintenance?" I snapped. "There's no maintenance. You tore up the edge of the pavement and left it like a war zone." She lifted her chin. "We're awaiting contractor approval. You'll have to be patient." "Patient?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're trespassing. You have no right to touch that road. It's legally mine." For a second, something flickered in her eyes, a mix of irritation and disbelief. But she quickly masked it with a smile. "We'll see what the county has to say about that." Then, in front of the neighbors who had gathered to watch the drama unfold, she said loudly, "You're in violation of community policy by interfering with official HOA operations. This will result in a fine." The crowd murmured. I could feel my face burning, not from embarrassment but pure anger. "Fine me all you want," I said. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." That finally wiped the smile off her face. For the first time, I saw a crack in her calm, just a flash of worry. Then she turned on her heel and walked off, leaving her board members scrambling after her. That night, I drafted an official cease and desist letter and attached a copy of my property deed. I sent it to the HOA's board and their legal representative, stating clearly that any further interference would result in legal action. But I knew Linda wouldn't back down so easily. People like her never do. And sure enough, within days, a new letter arrived in my mailbox. Not from the HOA, but from their attorney. It accused me of obstructing community property improvements and demanded I pay $200 in fines. That was the moment I realized this fight was about to get much, much uglier. The first letter was bad enough, a formal-looking envelope stamped with the HOA's crest and signed by their attorney, accusing me of non-compliance with community regulations. Inside was an invoice for $100 to $200 in fines and a threat of further legal action if I didn't pay within 10 days. At first I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from disbelief rather than humor. Then the anger hit. I'd spent weeks watching them destroy part of my road, and now they wanted me to pay for it. It was surreal. But the letters didn't stop there. Over the next month, I received 3 more, each one escalating in tone. The second claimed I was endangering community safety by removing HOA barriers. The third accused me of trespassing on my own property. And the fourth, the worst of all, warned that my continued hostility toward HOA operations could result in a lien against my home. That was the moment I knew they weren't bluffing. I started keeping every document, every letter, photo, and email. I even began recording conversations when I spoke to HOA members in person. If they wanted a paper trail, I'd give them one, but it would lead straight back to them. One evening, as I was organizing the files at my kitchen table, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my neighbor Rick, one of the few people still brave enough to talk to me openly. Heads up, Linda's holding a closed HOA meeting tomorrow. Your road's on the agenda. I didn't reply right away. My hands trembled slightly as I read the message again. They were planning something behind closed doors, something worse than fines. Sure enough, the next morning I found a brand new sign posted at the end of my lane. Unauthorized access prohibited, HOA property under review. That phrase, under review, was HOA speak for we're claiming it as ours. The intimidation was deliberate. They wanted me to fold, to stop fighting, to pay the fines, and let them rewrite the map. But what they didn't realize was that every threat only made me more determined. That night, I spread out my property documents across the table, tracing the survey lines with my finger. And there it was, plain as day. The legal boundary. The road, from start to finish, was within my parcel. The HOA had no right to touch it. So I made a decision. I called a property lawyer the next morning, a calm, sharp man named Mark Delaney, who specialized in HOA disputes. When I explained everything, he didn't sound surprised at all. "I've seen this before," he said. "They're bluffing, testing how far they can push you before you cave. But you've got the paperwork. That's your road, and we'll prove it." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. The HOA could send all the letters they wanted. This time, I'd be sending one back, and it wouldn't be a complaint. It would be a legal notice. Mark Delaney wasn't the kind of lawyer who wasted words. The day I met him, he sat quietly at my kitchen table, reading every page of my property file while the ticking clock filled the silence. When he finally looked up, he said only one sentence. But it was the first one that made me truly breathe again. "You're right. The HOA doesn't own that road." He spread out the old maps, faded blueprints from decades ago, when Maple Creek Estates didn't even exist. The road, clearly drawn in black ink, was labeled as Private Access Easement, Parcel 14B, my property. It wasn't connected to any HOA-managed area. The boundary line was clear and absolute. "They're either negligent," Mark said, "or they know this and are hoping you don't." That second option hit home. I knew Linda wasn't clueless. She was manipulative. The HOA had the same documents when they filed their incorporation papers. They just chose to ignore what didn't suit their control. Mark drafted a formal cease and desist notice, citing property law and attaching copies of the county's plat map, my deed, and historical survey records. The notice demanded that the HOA immediately remove all barricades, signs, and equipment from the road, cease any claim of ownership or maintenance rights, compensate for property damage caused by unauthorized work. We sent it by certified mail and copied the county recorder's office for good measure. 2 days later, I got the response I'd been waiting for, though not the one I hoped. Linda didn't back down. Instead, she called an emergency HOA board meeting, which she opened by dramatically reading my lawyer's letter aloud. She called it an attack on the community, accusing me of trying to privatize shared property for personal gain. The irony almost made me laugh. The road had always been private, long before her HOA ever came to exist. But that meeting turned into chaos. Neighbors started arguing, some with me, others with her. One older resident, Mrs. Palmer, spoke up from the back of the room. "Linda, I remember when that road was built. It's her road. You all moved in after." That single sentence caused a ripple. People began questioning, whispering. Linda's control was cracking. After that, Mark filed a formal claim with the county property office to reaffirm ownership of the access lane under my parcel. It was a simple filing, but it carried weight. Once the county confirmed it, the HOA's entire case would crumble. A few weeks later, the results came back. I remember the day vividly, a bright morning when the envelope arrived. Inside was a single document stamped and sealed by the county. Verified, road access parcel registered solely under my name. HOA jurisdiction not applicable. That was it. The smoking gun. For a moment, I just stood there on my porch, staring at that seal. Relief washed through me, but so did anger. They had lied, bullied, and threatened me, all while knowing they never had the right. It wasn't over yet, though, because even after I sent Linda the proof, she didn't apologize. She didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down. A new email from the HOA arrived that afternoon. We respectfully disagree with your interpretation. The matter will be reviewed at the next HOA meeting. Mark chuckled when I showed him. She's walking straight into a lawsuit, he said. And we're going to give her one. The legal discovery was done. The truth was on my side. Now it was time to make it official and take them to court. The night of the HOA meeting felt like walking into enemy territory. The clubhouse was packed. More residents than I'd ever seen before. Word had spread fast. The road dispute had become the neighborhood's biggest drama. Some people came out of curiosity, others out of loyalty, either to me or to Linda. I walked in with my lawyer, Mark, at my side, a folder of documents under his arm. Linda was already there, seated at the front table beneath a banner that read, Maple Creek Estates, Building a Stronger Community. She was dressed sharply, smiling like a politician about to give a victory speech. When she saw me, her expression flickered, just for a second. Then she leaned into her microphone. Thank you all for attending this special session, she began, her voice smooth and calculated. Tonight, we'll address a matter of significant importance to our community. The ownership and maintenance of the Maple Creek Access Road, currently under dispute. She said under dispute like it was a petty misunderstanding, not the month-long siege it had been. Mark leaned over and whispered, Let her talk. She's digging her own hole. Linda clicked her remote, and a projection of a community map appeared on the wall, except it was edited. The road, my road, was shaded in light blue, labeled Common Property Access Lane. I raised my hand. Where did you get that map? It's from our community improvement plan, she said sweetly. The board approved it. Approved? I shot back. You can't approve something that isn't yours. The room buzzed. Neighbors exchanged glances. Some nodded at me. Others looked uneasy. Mark stood up. If I may, he said calmly, my client has documentation from the county recorder confirming sole ownership of that road. It is not, and never has been, under HOA jurisdiction. He handed copies of the county-stamped verification to each board member. The room fell quiet, except for the soft shuffling of paper. Linda's smile faltered. These documents, well, they must be outdated, she said quickly. Our developers, Mark cut her off. They're dated last month, verified by the county assessor's office. A low murmur spread through the audience. One man in the back, Rick, my neighbor, spoke up. She's right. That road was private before the HOA even formed. Linda, you're wasting everyone's time. For the first time since this began, Linda's composure cracked. Her face tightened. Her tone grew sharp. We're doing what's best for the community. If certain individuals refuse to cooperate, we will pursue enforcement. Enforcement of what? I snapped. You've vandalized my property, blocked my access, and sent threats over land you don't own. The crowd erupted, voices shouting over each other, half defending her, half demanding answers. It was chaos. Then Mark raised his voice, firm and clear. My client is filing a lawsuit for property interference, damages, and harassment. If this board continues to assert false claims, each member may be held personally liable. Silence. Even Linda didn't have a comeback for that. Finally, one of the quieter board members, Tom, spoke up. Maybe we should pause this until the court decides, he said, glancing nervously at Linda. The motion passed by a shaky vote. Linda voted against it, of course, but her power was slipping. The meeting ended abruptly after that, with half the room whispering and the other half walking out shaking their heads. Outside, as I walked to my car, a few neighbors stopped to thank me. You're doing the right thing, one woman said quietly. She's gone too far. For the first time in months, I felt something shift, not just in the fight, but in the neighborhood itself. People were waking up to who Linda really was. The next step was court, and this time, I wasn't the one on defense. Filing the lawsuit felt like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Once those papers hit the courthouse, there was no going back. The fight between me and the HOA was no longer just neighborhood gossip. It was official. Mark handled everything with quiet precision. He filed the suit for property interference, damages, defamation, and unlawful restriction of access. We included photos of the barricades, copies of every letter, the certified property records, and even testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed the HOA's harassment. When the HOA received the notice, the reaction was immediate. Linda sent out a dramatic community-wide email titled, "Legal Attack on Maple Creek." She painted me as a selfish homeowner trying to undermine community unity. But that narrative didn't hold up for long. Once the facts started coming out, even her allies began to question her motives. The court date came a month later. It was a gray morning, one of those heavy, quiet days when the air itself feels tense. Inside the small county courtroom, I sat beside Mark while the HOA's attorney, a slick man in a pinstripe suit, tried to sound confident. Linda sat behind him, her expression tight, jaw clenched. The hearing didn't last long. Mark presented the property records first, handing them to the judge. Then he pulled out the county's verification letter, clearly stating that the road was solely within my deed boundaries and never recorded as HOA property. The judge frowned at the HOA's attorney. "Do you have any evidence contradicting this?" The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, the HOA has maintained the area for years." "Maintenance," the judge interrupted, "does not equal ownership, especially without consent. You could have heard a pin drop." Linda tried to speak up from her seat. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this affects the entire community." The judge held up a hand. "Ma'am, this is a matter of property law, not community preference. You cannot claim land you do not own." Mark handed over the final piece, photos of the barricades and signs the HOA had installed. The judge's expression hardened. "Blocking a homeowner's legal access to their property," he said, "is not only improper, it's unlawful." And just like that, the decision was made. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. The HOA was ordered to remove all barriers and signage within 48 hours, pay for the repair of any damage done to my road, reimburse my legal fees and court costs, issue a written apology acknowledging the overreach. Linda's face went pale as the ruling was read. For once, she had no speech, no smug smile, no argument left. The judge even added one final note for the record. Homeowners associations are meant to serve their residents, not rule over them. That line hit her harder than anything else. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months came up to shake my hand, some even cheering quietly. Rick clapped me on the back and said, "Told you. She picked the wrong person to mess with." By that evening, word spread through Maple Creek like wildfire. The barricades were gone the next morning. For the first time in months, I drove freely down my own road, windows down, the sound of gravel under my tires sweet as victory. But even in that moment of relief, I knew this story wasn't just about me. It was about every homeowner who'd ever been bullied, silenced, or fined by an overreaching HOA that forgot who it was supposed to serve. And as far as I was concerned, that reminder was worth every ounce of the fight. The morning after the court ruling felt almost unreal. For the first time in months, the end of my lane stood open. No barricades, no orange cones, no smug HOA property signs. Just the soft hum of the wind through the oaks and the sound of gravel crunching under my tires as I drove freely up to my house. The workers had come early that morning, under court order, to remove every last trace of the HOA's interference. Linda wasn't there to oversee it this time. No clipboard, no fake smile. Just silence and the faint sound of metal fencing being loaded onto a truck. I stood at the edge of my driveway, watching as they hauled the last of the debris away. The air smelled like fresh rain and asphalt, the smell of closure. Later that week, a letter arrived from the HOA board. It wasn't the usual list of fines or policy violations. This one was short, typed in plain language, and signed by all board members, including Linda. We acknowledge that the private access road in question belongs solely to your name and does not fall under the jurisdiction of the Maple Creek Estates HOA. We apologize for any inconvenience or distress caused. It wasn't an apology filled with warmth or sincerity, more like something forced by their lawyer. But it was enough. It was official, and it was written in black and white. Neighbors started stopping by again. Some brought cookies or coffee, their faces red with embarrassment for not speaking up sooner. Others offered quiet words of support. Rick, my ever-loyal neighbor, laughed and said, "Guess you're the HOA's favorite person now." But the real surprise came at the next HOA election. Attendance was at an all-time high. Nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. The room buzzed with tension as nominations opened, and one by one, residents called for new leadership. Linda tried to keep her composure, but it was clear the tide had turned. When the votes were counted, she was out, replaced by a quieter, more reasonable man named Greg Holloway, who started his term by saying, "The HOA exists to protect our community, not control it. Let's remember that." Under Greg's lead, the tone of Maple Creek changed. The rules softened, the fines stopped, the gossip faded. It felt like a neighborhood again, not a battlefield. As for me, I spent the next few weekends repairing the torn edges of my road, planting wildflowers along the border, and putting up a new wooden sign at the entrance. It read simply, "Private drive, welcome, but respect boundaries." Every time I passed it, I smiled. It wasn't just about the road anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for fairness, and for every homeowner who'd been pushed around by people who forgot what community really means. And in that quiet, peaceful neighborhood that had once felt suffocating, I finally found what I'd wanted from the start. Freedom, respect, and peace at the end of my own road.